Sarah, welcome. So good to see you.
Hey, Ken, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been excited. I told you a little bit before we just hit record that I love the amount of care that you put into our back and forth coming up to today. And not that we did a big outline, but it was more around what do our listeners, what are they thinking about right now? Because you have this very unique background, as we talk about or going to talk about in the intro, of working with people from all walks of life and all different kinds of industries. And of course, it's very uncertain times right now. But before we unpack some of that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, what you're doing, and how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, I am a professional executive coach who works with founders and influencers, impact leaders, super successful individuals who are generally owners, millionaires, multimillionaires. I've got one billionaire on my caseload right now. And I've created a team to serve their teams.
Awesome.
So the magic in that is, I think everybody aspires to be able to support someone who's an influencer. And actually getting to do it is surprising what you learn.
Sure.
There's not very many people who can hold that kind of space.
How did you get into it? Because this isn't a career you just walk into. You normally have some other life experience that takes you there.
Definitely. So, my first career, actually, I was an entrepreneur and a mental health therapist. I owned my own private practice with other therapists who worked with me. And in 2015, a friend of mine from college, who then was a multimillionaire, came back to the town that we had gone to college in where I was still living and said, "Hey, could we have lunch?" We sat and had lunch, Ken, for 2 hours.
Mhm.
At the end of it, he said to me, "Sarah, this was the best conversation I've had in a decade. You have got to become a professional executive coach. I know a dozen men who crave a confidential sounding board who's feminine with a reasonable, rational, scientific point of view." And do you know how sometimes you hear something and everything just aligns and
Yeah.
it feels like there's a portal, shoop,
Yeah.
and you just are taken there. It's kind of like the shoots and ladders
Well, I
game.
think it's funny because I think that if you're paying attention, those moments happen, right? It's almost like the universe is talking to you. Like some people always go, just show me a sign. I'm like, that's the sign, right? Some guy that you respect a lot
Yes.
said, you need to be doing exactly what you're doing, right? I was interviewing somebody a couple of weeks ago, and it was like, if people in an unsolicited way keep telling you that you have a certain gift, you probably have that gift. Like you're not even trying to sell it. Or if someone always comes to you for a particular kind of advice, there's a good chance there's a reason why everyone's coming to you for wise counsel in that area, right?
Definitely.
So what'd you do
So,
with that?
yeah, so I thought, interesting. Actually, the truth is to be very vulnerable and transparent, and no disrespect to my first career because I loved and appreciated the work I did and all of that. But honestly, I was a little bored and
Yep.
simultaneously a little burnt out.
Right.
So at the time, it seemed like, oh, let me look into this. And then what I didn't know then is that not only was I going to be incredible at this because I had practiced for 23 years holding confidential space. There's nothing anybody could say that's going to shock me. I mean, after
Sure.
I specialized in abuse, trauma, uh, there's just nothing anybody could say that would surprise me. What I learned is that so many executive coaches are, corporate burnout and they think, wait, I want to make a difference and I'm going to coach, or they have an MBA in business or something. What's needed is this full range of treating the fullness of the person and their being.
Yeah.
And so having someone I didn't know this, that it would be such a gift to have all of this background. And I was a strength-based cognitive behavioral therapist.
Okay.
So all this brain nerd, how do you leverage your brain? How do you make things work for yourself? All that positive psychology is so important and
Oh,
so useful in managing a team and frankly handling your life, because it doesn't matter whether you're making 100,000, a million, or $100 million, you still have families and you still have issues.
right.
And having, I think having that confidential sounding board, someone who can go there with you,
Right.
for me, it's quite sacred space. I just had no awareness of how much that would be appreciated when I first stepped into
Well,
that area.
yeah, I think the thing that you brought to it, and this is what your friend told you, this is really interesting because um, I've I'd say I don't even want to say dabbled in coaching. I've actually been in coaching at different parts of my life. Right now, I've got a professional group that I serve as kind of the head coach for in our industry, and so it's more like group coaching. But beyond that, I've done some coaching with Tony Robbins. I'm a trainer
Yeah.
with him. I, I I felt like when it came to one-on-one coaching, which I've done some of, oh, and I'm not talking about industry stuff. I'm talking about overall life coaching.
Yeah.
That you're so much well versed in this than I am, but let's see if I'm on the right track here. I did not feel. Uh, I don't want to act like it's imposter syndrome or something. I really don't like that theory, but so many people come to the table with pre-existing baggage, right? That may have to do with their mental health, which is where you're a professional.
Yes.
And I think most coaches are not trained on how to unpack all of that baggage. They're trained on, if they're good, on how to move you forward. But if you never get rid of all the stuff you came to the table with, all the stuff that's all your limiting beliefs and all of that, and listen, I can work on some of that stuff, right? But if there's severe or serious psychological issues, my, 100 hours of online coaching isn't going to really replace your whatever decade in a
Yeah.
professional
23,
education. Yeah. So
23
so
years.
so I think the combo is really interesting because I've always viewed therapy in a way as in the past, and I've always viewed coaching in a way as moving forward, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Actually, right on the money. I always will say therapy is problem focused,
Yes.
trauma sometimes focused in the past. And
Right.
often if you need therapy, and I have clients who coach with me who also have therapists,
Yes, of course.
they may be really high functioning in some areas, but have impairment in
Sure.
others. So
Sure.
there's a lot of wounded well in the
Yeah.
world who I'm going to say aren't mentally ill, but they might be
Right.
having mental health issues. So
Of course, and not to interrupt, but that one thing, like, so I'm a good example of this in a way. So I was super high functioning, but had addiction issues. I was super high functioning,
yes,
but had big issues with my parents that were like holding me back, right? And so it's like, again, that's not a coach isn't going to walk me through normally the
right.
addiction thing, or the coach isn't going to walk me through the inner workings of my relationship with my mom necessarily. They might be great at, again, helping me create a plan and a vision and a future around a particular goal that I have, right? But that's two different things, and I think for most of us, you do need a bit of both, and I bet that's just why you thrive so much jumping into this, you know?
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's not only walk through, but understand and have expertise.
Yes.
So that past is so different than coaching. So I'm a strength-based appreciative inquiry coach, certified in a lot of different things and specialize in emotional intelligence. The power in the coaching, in appreciative inquiry coaching, and I'll tell you about that if you're not familiar with it, is asking the powerful questions that create such an exciting future that it pulls you there instead of running away from the past. We all have pasts. We all have some level of dysfunction. Anybody who has a family has some level of
Sure.
dysfunction. And in businesses, Well, two things I'd like to mention. In businesses, when something really challenging happens, for example, somebody has been embezzling on the team, or a senior partner has inappropriate behavior with an intern, you need an expert who can come in and unpack that and move your team forward. If you've had somebody on your team die, I mean, I've had people reach out to me globally now because now I'm known worldwide, which is lovely.
Sure.
Um, there are real times when a business coach is not going to be enough. So that's the first piece. And the second piece is when you're successful, the pressure that you feel and the intensity of that is worse. So
Totally.
you don't want to tell your team. Sometimes you don't even want to tell the best things, and you for sure don't want to tell the worst things. And sometimes you don't want to tell your spouse.
Right.
So having that confidential sounding board as a leader, they don't have anybody holding them accountable. And I call it a dynamic duo. Tell me your thoughts. I think people generally fall in one of two camps: accountability coaches
Mm-hmm.
or insight coaches. And I believe the magic is in both. We need the aha moments. Oh, that's why I'm showing up the way I am. But then you need the accountability to
I,
actually create
no,
change.
I agree so much. I guess I've actually had both, so I'm a big believer in coaching. I've hired coaches, like I said,
Yes.
been a coach. Um, there's a program, and I don't want to trash it at all because I think it's interesting conceptually. I kind of like it, and so I tried it. And you've probably heard of them, but they're called Commit Action. I don't know if you've seen them. They advertise all the time on like social media and stuff. And again,
Yeah,
not
LinkedIn.
knocking them at all, but I'll just relate like my experience because it wasn't bad. It just wasn't something that was for me. But I signed up for it because I sort of liked their ads. It was like, what you need in business is, you're going to put your benchmarks out there. And again, who's holding you accountable? Like, we'll hold
Right.
you accountable. I was like, and it's cheap because it wasn't all the fluffy stuff. It was just sort of like a meeting once every 2 weeks or whatever you said. And it's like, here's what you said you're going to do. Here's what you did. And what's next. And they did do a really good job in a formatted way of helping you isolate and define what you were going to do in between sessions, right? But there was none of the other stuff.
Right.
So I was sort of like, well, do I really need someone to tell me what's on my to-do list? Like, was kind of how I viewed it after a while, because the person checking me in was just following a script, and I could tell that they were right. There wasn't like any insight to it. And it
Yeah.
was a good script, though. I was like impressed with this. I'm like, this is a good script. But the person like delivering the script, and maybe I just had somebody that was new. I don't know. But and she wasn't terrible. I was like, she's not giving me insights, right? Then I've had the other thing where it's all insights, and I'm a business guy. I want like return on investment, right? I
That's
want like,
right.
I mean, a little bit of fluffiness, but is the fluffiness like going to pay for itself at some point, right? We do want that, especially as business coaches, right? So I agree with you. I think the two need to go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's really a good mix. And I don't think actual change happens without both.
Right.
So I think of coaching as having three levels. Kind of tools and tactics is the surface level. That's accountability.
Sure.
A level deeper is mindset and strategy. And that's where things like EOS, I used to be an EOS implementer. I still use it in my company. Brilliant strategy,
Yep.
brilliant accountability. The deepest level, though, is really the being of the person. How are you showing up in the world? And is
Sure.
this who you want to be? Are you showing up to your family? Are you showing up to your spouse, to your team, to your business in a way that you're proud of?
Yep. I dig that. Yep. And I mean, because you're right. Until that changes, the rest of it's all kind of superficial. It's not going to last, right? Same with this commit action thing. It's like, okay, well, you got me to do it because I had the phone call, but what have I really changed in my own wiring and my own belief system? Probably nothing, right?
Yeah.
So super interesting. You asked me in our kind of back and forth before we got on here the last few days about, what's going on with our audience? What pain points are they feeling? And I would say, and I can even talk about again, the group that I'm coaching now is not for mindset. It is purely strategic. It's industry specific. So I'll have 30 or 40 people. We talk a little bit about mindset, but we talk a lot about practical applications in our industry. So I'm teaching them software and I'm teaching them.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the type of coaching that we're talking about, but I do hear their pain points, right? Especially depending on industries and things like that. And what I've noticed right now is with the economy the way it is right now, and are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession?
Right.
There's certainly certain industries that you could call are almost in a depression. I mean, if you look at 70% declines, 80% declines in their stock prices, massive reductions in labor, right? So I think it just depends on where you're sitting right now and what your view is. I think to those of us that our businesses are still thriving or doing well, we might still have some fear because everything's not rosy around us, right? It's like you're sitting on the boat that's floating and a bunch around you might be sinking, right? And it's like, I'd
Scary.
say that, yeah, that's what I'm hearing the most right now is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of, a lot of uncertainty from business owners, a lot of, we don't know kind of what's going to happen and whoever does, right? But I'm guessing you're hearing that a lot in your clientele right now. And how are you guys kind of dealing with that?
Yeah, it's definitely on people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I was working with a global organization and they asked me to bring a workshop series to them. It's a great story because the individual who called me, I had coached about 2 years ago. He'd been an individual performer and he called me and said, the goal of coaching was he wanted to be promoted to the global leadership team for this company. For confidentiality, I won't use their name,
Yeah,
but they're
it's cool.
huge. And he got the promotion on the leadership team. Then he reached out again. He wanted to become the director of the team. So got the directorship. Then he reached out to me. So we've got this long relationship together and said, would you bring the workshop series to the leaders of the company? We're having issues. So I said, great. We probably talked 3 hours for me to find what are the pain points.
Sure.
And he really said, we're having a hard time hiring and retaining high talent. People want more. They're being very picky post COVID. They want
Sure.
meaning and purpose and, this great walkout. Even though they're in Europe, they're really struggling with it. He said, we're having problems. A lot of their average age of leader, mid-level director is 38. So this young talent pool who's pretty cutthroat. They think they know everything, but they don't. Nobody teaches emotional intelligence. So they're having
Right.
a hard time with their leaders
Right.
showing up and keeping the people who are the employees. So together we developed a culture by design program to help address their main pain points. I've turned that into my legendary leaders group. What's interesting when you ask about this is I end up thinking about positive psychology stats. The
Mm-hmm.
research shows, I'll test you. Let's see,
Cool.
because you probably
Cool.
like a game.
I do.
Uh,
And I like
all right.
numbers.
All right. Me too. I'm
Cool.
such a nerd about this kind of stuff.
Cool. Cool.
So, happiness, 50% of our happiness is based on, do you know this research? Because I'll tell you
No.
the first one.
No, I'll
Okay.
tell you if I do.
Genetics.
Okay.
50% is on our genetics. We have a
Okay.
genetic set point.
Okay.
So, I know I'm wired to worry. I can see it in my parents. I can see it in my grandma.
Okay.
So I know came to me very normally, naturally. Only 10% is circumstances.
Wow.
10%,
Okay.
which is so mind-blowing because what that says is we think the world's going to end if there's a recession.
Ooh, can I time you out just for a second?
Yeah.
Sorry, not to interrupt the thought. So when you say 10% is the circumstance, you mean 10% is the actual thing, right? So but well, you're going to get into the other 40% that we have left.
Mhm. Yes.
so it's the mindset and the thought, not actually the circumstance, right? That's freaking us out. I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but
Oh,
the
brilliant.
real thing is not the condition. It's a little bit, right? It's like,
Right.
okay, there's a real thing here, but it's all the worrying we do. It's all the advanced negative thinking. It's all the picturing a negative outcome instead of a positive one. I mean, what do the rest of those stats look like?
I'm just going to give you 12 gold stars. Ding,
Oh,
ding.
cool, cool,
You got it.
cool.
So, right, 10%, we think the world's going to end or we
Right.
make $1 million, life will be wonderful. Well, I know a billionaire who's a millionaire, just
Yes.
miserable. He's
Yes.
worried about money every minute of the day. You're right. So my quiz for you is going to be, well, there's 40% left. What's that?
Yes.
And you already named it. So this is what I love about you. You're so evolved. I love listening to you. I'm just
Oh,
giving you
thank you.
a little
Oh,
extra
cool.
gold star here
Thank you.
on the podcast because you really think deeply about this.
Thank you.
So what's left is our intentional behavior and thought. So that's the playground of coaching. That's where we get to make a change. There was a great study. I should have looked it up. If I think of it, I'll tell you. She can post it in the notes of people who had won $1 million in the lottery or had become a quadriplegic from an accident. And they researched their happiness over a period of time.
Ooh.
And at the end of the 3 years, people returned to their set point, and some of the quadriplegics individuals were happier than the people who had won the money.
I have a theory on that
Okay.
they were forced to tap into that, right? They didn't have a choice. They lost so much or perceivably so much that it was, what else in life can I be grateful for right now? Versus I think the lottery winner, nothing really changes for them, right? I mean, necessarily. I just read a thing yesterday. It was a European person who won like the biggest jackpot ever over there, and somehow spent all of it in 7 years and died. I mean, it was just like, that's the story. Like, it's, I wish there was more to it, but they were like, it was just an ungodly sum. It was an average of $40 million a year,
Wow.
and died. Oh, and divorced along the way. So him and
Of
his
course.
wife, it was his money. They split it, so it caused him to get divorced, died. Everything else along the way. There's a very, I'd love to hear more. Not that we need to stay on lottery winners, but I am fascinated by that phenomenon that we are all so hung up on when I get the money, when I get the money. And most lottery winners, I'm making this up. I don't have a stat. I believe most lottery winners give it away because they never were wired on how to keep it, and it never brought them the happiness they were looking for. And so when they got it, there was, there's no discipline behind it, there's no meaning behind it, and if anything, it's just a distraction from other stuff that probably needed to be worked on.
Yeah. There's a true difference between financial well-being,
Yeah.
happiness, and joy.
Yeah.
So
Can I
something,
ask you, oh, I'm sorry, can I ask you a money related question? Because
yeah,
this happened to me, or happened to me, for me, I should say, I guess. I I have been hardwired my whole life to want to make money, and not in such a healthy way necessarily. So
I've heard.
yeah,
I've heard on your
and
shows.
cool. So I want you to analyze me a little bit, but so as you know, then I got to this point where I made some money when I was young, but again, almost like a lottery winner, a lot like a lottery winner, because we sold a business kind of out of nowhere for a sum that was much greater than we thought the company was worth. And all of a sudden it was like we were the Beverly Hillbillies, right? I'm building the mansion and I'm building the swimming pool, and I'm like literally like in my early 30s doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then I ran into money problems and lost money in the stock market, and boo hoo, all of a sudden it's all gone. And all of the limiting beliefs from childhood come back. And it's like, see, like this isn't where you're supposed to be. Right. And I think that's what happens with lottery winners. It's like we're all set on that thermostat to be at, 70 degrees. And it's like, it's getting too hot in here. If you're not trained by a professional or somehow just lucky, I think we will find a way to sabotage ourselves, right? I mean, we'll just give it away. And so that happened, and then there was a gradual build back up, and then kind of another similar experience. And I'd say finally, like the last decade, I really went to work on it because I literally got in this mindset, Sarah, where I felt like I'm really good at making money. I'd say this to myself all the time. I'm great at making money. I'm not great at keeping it. Almost like it's okay. Like it's okay because I can make plenty of money. I'm just not ever really going to keep it because that's just who I am. And what is that? That's just such a weird mindset. And it literally took me because after a while you can academically understand that that is messed up thinking. I mean, here I am taking all my Tony Robbins trainings and doing all this.
Yeah.
I know academically it's stupid or certainly not a great thought process.
Not productive for
You're not
sure.
productive.
We could call it that.
And finally, for me, the thing that kind of worked in addition to all this work was um, not full blown hypnosis where I'm like unconscious or whatever, but just sort of like rewiring, you
Yeah.
know? And I still listen to that stuff all the time. It's almost like listening to incantations or something like that. And it actually works. Like if I don't listen to it for a week or so, I notice that I worry more about money. And when I listen to this stuff on a kind of a daily basis, I almost do it as like a meditative thing.
Yeah.
I don't worry about money. I don't the charge of money. So for me, there was a very big charge in money, both positively and negatively. So the act of making a lot of money almost felt like if someone did a line of cocaine or something. But the act of losing money almost felt like losing a loved one or something, right? It was these massive extremes, right? There's manic kind of extremes. And this just kind of takes that out of it. There's just not the charge around it. And there's a lot of confidence, I guess, around the ability to attract it and retain it, if that makes sense. But it took a
Yeah, it
while.
does. Couple things come to mind. One is that rewiring process is essential to growth in the being of who you are. There's different ways to do that. I think it sounds like you found a way that worked really well for you. I know it's interesting and popular right now to try psychedelics. I know you had your guest
Tommy
two
Rosen, yeah,
yeah, a while
he's
back.
great.
So I have done a lot of work with clients who are interested in that with reintegration. So if they're working with somebody who's doing that kind of work, then I'm someone who can help them with the long term. You know, you have the experience, but then after you want to actually integrate that new
Right,
rewiring. It's kind of
right,
like having, instead of being on the interstate, it's like you're making little bunny tracks in the snow, and we want to capture that rewiring. So when you're talking about, well, I'm listening to something, whether it's hypnosis or affirmations, you're literally rewiring your brain.
yes, yep,
Um, so that's very interesting. I think what's underneath that most people miss, which is why it's below mindset, underneath that is the being, is the script of I'm not good enough,
right,
or I effed up, or I
yep,
ruined everything, or I
totally,
can't do it right. It's this shame cycle. And I think it's true for sure in America and Western cultures and also in Europe that nothing's ever good enough.
right,
So if we look for money or looks or our weight or I don't know, what are the other things, the right car, it's never enough.
right.
So there's this piece even underneath of how can you come to terms with just being okay with who you are?
I agree completely. And that was part of this whole process for me. It was sort of
Yeah.
like it is a good thing to do well in this area because it brings the ability to help others. It brings the ability to have some peace around this area and nice things or whatever. But it no longer needs to be the defining thing. And I think for a lot of time for me, like going back to being a child and from not having it and really wanting it, it became the defining thing. And again, there's been some wins from that. There's been some, that drives you sometimes to doing better or hitting certain goals or whatever. But then eventually, like you said, it's a road to it's kind of a road to nowhere also, right? It's like your billionaire friend who still can't find peace around that, and we all look at it, and I know it pisses people off because I've been one of those people who, how can a billionaire be? It's like, because, man, it's just one area of life. You know what I mean? It's just one little piece of the puzzle, and all of the other ones could be screwed up, even though they became very, very successful in one area.
Well, and often, and I wonder if it was like this where it gets very entangled. The self-worth, your
Yes,
identity becomes related to what your dollar is worth.
totally,
Yeah.
totally.
So that's one of the pieces. When it's interesting, the type of clients who reach out to us that I love to work with fall in certain categories. And you've named one of the categories. It's this ambitious piece. Are you curious? Because I think your
Yeah,
listeners would be really
of
interested.
course. Yeah, let's hit the categories.
So I think of people in terms of what their motivators are, what their drivers are. So if somebody's in victim or struggle mode, committed to the victim, persecutor, rescuer drama triangle, that's not very interesting. This is somebody who wants to always blame
Yes.
everybody else.
Yeah.
And so they're not a great coaching candidate. There are coaches who might love doing that. That's not me.
They're like stuck in the story. You're never going to make
Yes.
progress, right? Yep.
Yes. The next category is this aspirational category. So I have a really good story for you about an aspirational client. I love to work. This is somebody who wants to be a millionaire,
Hmm.
but isn't sure if they can do it. So I had a client come to me about 4 years ago. He's quite well known in his industry now. He had been, you're familiar with the EOS? Do you know about the
Oh, yeah,
visionary and
yeah.
integrator?
Hmm.
So he'd been the integrator for a visionary who'd sold the business, I don't know, maybe for $100 million or more. I'm not sure that I know the full number. And he came to me with just the whisper of an idea and said, I did it for him. I am scared.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You could
I was
say
gonna say,
it.
I'm scared shitless. I'll just
Yeah,
say,
go ahead. It's all
he
good.
literally said, I am scared shitless.
Yeah.
I want to do this. I have this idea that would turn the industry on its end, and I want to try it. Will you help me? I mean,
Yeah.
I can feel the
Sure.
goosebumps even now as I remember that story. And do you know, since we've worked together, not only did he build that next business, sell it for more than the business that they sold his
Yeah.
partner. Majority, he was a minority owner then, sold that business for. He's on the next one.
Nice.
So I love the aspirational, the person who has that ambition, that drive, because if we can get those couple of things figured out,
Right.
what brings them alive,
Right.
where their meaning and purpose is, and get all that lined up, then they can just do amazing things.
Well, I think people like that, same because I feel like I can identify with that, is, kind of like it's almost like you're driving a sports car with a tire that's been blown out, and you're like,
Yeah,
this thing's supposed to go faster than it's going, and I intellectually understand that I've got a problem, but I don't know how to fix it. Like, I don't have the
exactly.
toolkit to fix the tire, right? So somebody's got to help me. But I agree with you. I mean, part of the reason I don't think I loved individual one-on-one coaching is I probably didn't do client selection well enough, because what I couldn't stand
Yeah,
is working with people. It'd be like going to the gym and someone goes, I want to lose 50 pounds. I'm going to pay you a bunch of money, but I'm going to show up when I want to, and I'm going to eat cheeseburgers all day. I'd be like, that's
that's
not
right.
fulfilling for me. I don't really want to work with you, you know?
Right.
And in coaching, people are a lot that way, as you know, right? There's a lot of people, but that ambitious type, I dig,
Mhm.
because you're like, wow, we can do amazing things together, and you're for sure going to get your
Yes.
ROI, right? And I'm for
Oh,
sure going to
yeah.
get fulfilled by watching you achieve all these things. That's got to be
Oh,
really fulfilling.
yeah, it's so fun. It's
Yeah.
just, there's a great book. Actually, the book's not great, but the title's really fun. It's Coaching is Better Than Sex. And it
Yeah.
is about how fun it is to
Yeah.
really transform people's worlds. And when you get to work with influencers, you're not only changing their life, but you're changing entire corporations,
Yeah. All the people they're
things on the
impacting.
world
Yeah.
stage. I mean, it's amazing. Okay, the next
Yeah.
category, I call it conventional success. So this is someone who's made it, but they don't want to take any risks because you know what? things are pretty good and I don't
Right.
want to mess with anything. And so they're kind of in the comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
is how I think of it. That's a little boring for me,
Sure.
to really be
Yeah,
honest. Like,
I'm with
okay,
you.
they might want to change 1 or 2 degrees. I want a 10x. I want a
Yeah.
100x
Yeah.
something. Then the next category is exponential success. This is the leader, the impact leader, the person who's made it financially, huge success, but inside or in their family or in their team is having tremendous struggle, and they're not sure how to handle it. So that's a really beautiful place to help someone. There's
Sure.
not a lot of people on the world. I am a master certified coach through the
Mm-hmm.
International Coaching Federation. Only 4% of ICF certified coaches are masters.
Okay.
And I think I figured out at some point, what are there, 6,000 billionaires and there's less than 2,000 MCCs. I thought, well, we each could have,
You,
a
you could have
handful.
you could have three or something each.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we're rare. So this piece of working with someone who says, "Wow, I've made it," and I've heard you have other people on your podcast who says, "Well, what next?
Yeah.
What now?"
Yeah.
I'm interested in, not only ROI of your business, but the positive ripples of impact. That's my favorite kind of ROI. How do we change the world?
Totally.
Yeah. And
Well, yeah,
you're
I
in
mean,
that.
it's funny because you just hear the same patterns all the time, and I wonder sometimes, like, if my audience is getting sick of it, and I'm like, I don't care because it comes up organically, and that the road to success, not to success, the road to fulfillment always ends up going through contribution at some point, and it's like you've got to do something that impacts something outside yourself, period, whatever that is for you. It doesn't mean it's got to be the whole world, but it's got to be something more than. I think that's where people get to this point where we've all been sold or created our own version of what good is or where we're supposed to be, and that's what happened to me. I mean, I think it was like, well, if I make $1 million by the time I'm 30 or 32 or whatever it was, like, then that's great. That means I'm my own hero. And then it's like you get there and you're like, well, no, I'm not. Like, because all this other stuff isn't going out well, or what's next, right? It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't really change who I am or whatever. And so, and then you can multiply that for these other people at different levels, but it's always comes back to you finding out what it is. And I think it's really cool that you get to help people find that. Was that our fifth category? Because I wanted to ask you another question on that category. Or was that our fourth?
Four categories. I have a
Four.
client story I could tell you. That's the top category. There's four. So
Yes.
I
Tell
have
me
a
about the
client
client
story.
story. Yeah.
So one of the things when I reached out to you before the podcast, I said, "What's the stuff that's keeping your listeners awake at 2 in the
Yeah.
morning? What are they
Yeah.
stressing about?" And of course, this is part of it. So over COVID, my business actually went from regional to national to then global. I really grew exponentially. What I learned is that, and this is a great tip for your listeners, proactive leaders, when things are challenging, they get strategic, they get help.
Yeah.
They don't sit around. Reactive leaders, they are in their primitive brain, fight or flight. They're not in their best prefrontal cortex where we do our best thinking. They're reactive, they're just behind the curve.
Yeah.
And I saw really good businesses tank in COVID because their owners, their leaders they weren't slowing down. They weren't being strategic. They didn't think it through. I had a call. It was probably, it might have been May of 2020. I'd had a 30-minute connect call with this individual, multimillionaire. This is our first coaching session. I connect really well, was super smart, maybe nerdy, maybe you could say neurodiverse individuals. So think somebody who is brilliant and like something's
Yeah.
a little off there. What's going on there? My niche is emotional intelligence. So think maybe Richard Branson, like,
Yeah.
brilliant. You know,
Sure.
what's really going on there? So this particular individual, first coaching session, we're on Zoom because he's far away. And we start coaching and I do we're having our conversation and he starts to weep and he puts his camera off and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, "You're allowed to cry. Oh my gosh, you are under so much pressure. I can't believe you haven't talked to anybody about this. The magic is I'm holding this space where people feel safe to say something they've never told a soul."
Sure.
And he said, "I've never felt so seen."
Interesting. That's cool.
And in that, we were really able to talk about the deepest things, the things he was so worried about. And it wasn't just, not to diminish it, it wasn't just work, which he was holding on and managing a whole lot of things by a thread, but it also was some really significant challenges happening in his home life. Um, One of the things that also I think attracts people to work with me, it's those two type of people that I want to work with.
Right.
They're attracted to work with somebody who'll bring out their brilliance, elevate them to their zone of genius,
Yeah.
not competence, not excellence, but really what brings them alive. That's what's fulfilling for us all. But it's also, they want, I think the actual thing people are seeking,
Mm-hmm.
not really money.
Mm-hmm.
It is maybe financial freedom,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also time freedom.
Yep.
Flow.
Time, impact, I think. Time and impact
Yes.
are like two of the biggest. One thing I was going to share with you that I thought was
Yeah.
super interesting around COVID and around this topic that you're talking about, how some people kind of froze and some people looked
Yeah.
at like what's going on here. And I think maybe this could apply right now to sort of this I don't know, whatever post COVID economy that we're in. But my wife and I bucked the trend and we moved into New York City when everyone was moving out of New York City at the beginning
Yeah.
of COVID. And it's because our adult kids live out here. And New York did some, New York, if you remember at the very beginning, because of our condensed population, it was like this was kind of the US epicenter, right? It was
Yeah.
Seattle, but then from Seattle, it was like, oh my God, New York's going to go
Yes.
bananas with the 20 million people that are out here. And it was very weird here and very spooky and kind of like a ghost town and super trippy to be in like midtown Manhattan at Times Square and not see anyone. I mean, that's just the most bizarre
Yeah.
thing in the world. But,
Yeah.
through all of that, you could also watch by walking down the streets of like Greenwich Village. You could as things slowly started to not come back to normal, but started to come into that COVID norm where it was like outdoor dining with masks on
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And what you could see in one, if you're paying attention, in one walk down the street, you could see what you're talking about play itself out with restaurant owners in real life, where there would be a four-table restaurant typically. Oh,
Mhm.
because that's in New York. If you're like little hole in the walls, it's like you literally
Right.
have four tables. And they went, well, okay, this is terrible, but we got to regroup. We got to do something. We got to feed ourselves. So, hey, the city's saying we can build outdoor patios now on a sidewalk that we're not paying for. Now all of a sudden, I've got a 12-table restaurant with heat being plumbed out to the outside, and I'm producing 3 times the volume. But the guy next door quit.
Right.
They just never even tried. They just hung a sign up and left. And I feel
Yes.
like that's kind of happening right now. Like when I'm talking to people, it's like, don't get me wrong. If you're a tech worker for Google, and I noticed that they laid off 13,000 the other day. By the
Yeah.
way, the headlines are just so, not to go on a whole bashing of the news, but I believe Google has something like 300,000 employees. So another headline that would be as accurate as them laying off 13,000 would be they retain 97%. But
Right.
anyway, like, so it
It's
sounds
alarming.
like,
It's all meant
yeah,
to freak people out. It's so not
exactly.
helpful.
Same with the Amazon layoffs. And don't get me wrong, like if you were impacted by that, that sucks. But I'm saying globally, when we look at it, what are the
Right.
percentage of people that got hit and everything by that? And I just think that if you're not in one of those industries directly, it's like, what can you do? Or even if you are in one of those, what is going on right now? Because there are industries that are thriving, and there are definitely new businesses and services being created right now that
Right.
are the next thing. I train recruiters, and some of those recruiters are in niches that you can't place people in
Right.
because it's tech and they're slowing down or whatever. But there's other industries that are booming. So, like, how do you pivot? And it's like, I think so much of it is we get caught in, again, I'm not good enough. Why would I have the authority to start working in nursing when my thing's always been corporate leadership? And it's like, well, train yourself and become the expert, right? It's like
Right.
I think the ability to pivot and the ability to use a coach like yourself or your team to help get out of those, I guess, just pre-existing limiting beliefs so that you can move on and do something productive is huge in an economy like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's vital. I think about the analogy I use. EOS would call it a clarity break. I call
Yeah.
it above the cloud time. It is, if you're in the basement, all you see is walls.
Yeah.
If you take an elevator, let's say up to the top of the Space Needle, well, you have a much clearer view. And
Yeah.
if you get in a plane and you break through the cloud cover, so we can pretend that economic situation right now, despite the improvement in the GDP that we heard are surprising
Yeah.
from yesterday, a little better than we thought it would be. Still, if it feels like it's cloudy, that moment when you break through the clouds in a plane?
Yeah.
That's the above the cloud time for me. It's when you can strategically see all the way
Yeah.
360 degrees and make clear choices. I had a restaurateur that I worked with multiple locations through COVID, multiple locations in multiple cities, and they quickly pivoted. They recognized where's the market, what's happening. They switched to an online feed your family
Yeah.
takeout menu.
Yeah.
They were licensed so they could send alcohol. They made better profits. I don't know.
Totally.
I think it was 5 times the profits because they didn't have to pay wait staff. They
Yeah.
didn't have turnover time. They actually were like, how are we going to keep making this much money when they went back to being able to have people in restaurants again?
Right.
And so I do think that that's that 40% that we're talking
Yeah.
about. It's very hard to do that alone.
Right.
You need to, if you're the smartest person in the room, or if you're the leader and your leaders are looking to you, you need to level up the room you're in so that you get better support, better advice, somebody to draw out your own solutions, your own brilliance to figure
Totally.
those things out.
Totally. I think again, I hate saying that something that was so tragic for so many people was a gift in some ways, but for me, the pandemic was my above the clouds moment, even though it was super scary. And our business is leadership recruiting, and it stopped. It
Yeah.
ceased to exist. I mean, sometimes when people say like, "Oh yeah, business really got hurt," I zero. Like no, it ceased to exist. It stopped. I literally went like, my wife and I looked at each other and went, "Well, what do you want to do now?" Like, we still got to work. We got some money, but not enough to live the lifestyle we want for the rest of our lives. So what do we want to do now? Plus, we got a lot to give, right? We want to do some other stuff. So it gave us that break. It gave us that break to be above the clouds, to see things clearly, to take a breath, and to kind of reimagine what we could be moving forward. What was super interesting from that is we've now, I was going to say doubled the size of the company. We doubled the size of the company last year. We're going to double it again this year from pre-COVID levels. And it's a new company. We completely rebranded it. We started the podcast. We did all that kind of stuff. So yeah, from nothing, from it not existing. And we'll should make the Inc. 5000 this year and like all kinds of other stuff. So it's, I don't know. It's just weird sometimes when you can have that above the clouds moment and have the proper mentor and kind of, I call it board of directors, even if it's a great coach or a great friend or whoever those people are
Sure.
that you have in your corner, you know?
That's really interesting because I've got two thoughts for you. I did the same. So I spent the most money on my own personal business coach for myself that I'd ever spent. Literally, as I did the wire transfer, I think my hands were shaking.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? It's the middle of a pandemic. And it was the best money I ever spent
Sure.
because when you have a really both that coaching relationship that is both accountability and the strategy, the being of who you are, you're working on this. I mean,
Right.
that's the gift. I'm sure the people in your group feel this too. They know, hey, we're going to get to this. There's
Right.
somebody's holding this thread, the golden thread of whatever that dream is that you want, and helping me create it.
Right.
So that's the first thought, that as you shared your story, I was like, oh, I did the same thing.
Yeah.
And my business, I mean, my rates went up 15 times, but they 15x'd. Let me say it
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, the other thing is that I want to point out that you and your wife did something really interesting. Happiness research, and you started to say this earlier. I don't know that you know the stats, so I'm going to give it to you. Happiness research tells us there are three things that give us true meaning, purpose, and I'd call it joy as opposed to happiness, which I think of as more fleeting. Three things that we can do for that. It's helping others.
Mm-hmm.
It's personal or professional growth, developing ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and it's relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that the two of you looked at each other and said, what now? How are we going to make a difference? And you moved to be closer to family. I have a coach in New York City, and they said it's uncanny how uncomfortable it felt to walk down the streets and have nobody there.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that you say that. When you started going down this, I can't help myself. I'm in my head going, I think she's going to say growth, and I think she's going to say contribution, but I didn't know the third thing that you were going to say was going to be relationships. What's really interesting about that is, and I've never really talked about this, but my wife and I were never very involved together in the business. She had dabbled in and out of it. And I always thought, or I always said, like, well, she just doesn't have that much of an interest in it. It's kind of my thing. She does it when she needs to. I mean, there's been times she's come in and literally just gone, like, this, I'm going to do something else now. And I'm like, okay, like, whatever. And to me, it was always like, well, it's really hard to have a business where it's, one person's kind of leading it and you're still a couple and you're at home and all of this. But, the reality was I never created the space for anyone else, especially my wife, to come into the company and be seen and have an impact or contribute in any kind of meaningful way outside of just doing the shit that I needed her or anybody else to do. So COVID allowed me to go, do you want to do this together this time? I don't think I ever said it that way, but that's what happened. We rebranded it together. We created the name together. We brought the people back together. We got the clients back together. I trained her on our customers, and it became a totally different experience because from that created a culture of doing the same thing with our new employees and contractors that we're bringing back. Do you know what I mean? Where it didn't
Yeah.
rely so much on me, and that's where our growth has come from. Was from me, I think, getting out of everybody's way and doing that third part of what you're talking about, which is really valuing the relationships that life and the business are built on.
Yeah. Well done, you. You're beating the odds. In fact, we know the divorce rate is quite, I don't know exactly what it is. I haven't looked
Sure.
that up. I think it's 50-50 right now. But for successful leaders, it's actually the likelihood that they have a challenging relationship or they aren't in a good love relationship or that their marriage, I guess, the statistic was specifically on marriage, 80% of the time, they have an unhappy, challenged relationship. Only 20% of the time are highly successful individuals navigating that well. That's the other thing people come to me for.
Right.
which is relationship coaching, you would be surprised. People are much more willing to invest in their marriage, their family sometimes than they are in themselves.
Hmm.
So they might be like, well, I know I need this, but gosh, if we could also check the box to help me connect with my wife and help my children like me, it's amazing.
Well, it's funny because I'm acting like I'm navigating these waters really well, and it's still challenging. I got to, it's still
Well,
because I'm used to running fast and I'm used to running solo a bit,
yeah.
right? And even in my corporate career, generally my bosses would be states away, right? And I could just kind of call the shots for our region or our group or whatever. And so it takes training, right? It takes some rewiring to go, oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to ask everybody what they think, and I'm supposed to, and it, but
Right.
then, and I sometimes resent it, but then I go, oh, we collectively just came to a much better idea together than we would have separately. But hey, I know we're coming up on our time here, and I want to just really thank you, not just for your time today, but all the thought and diligence that you put into to our meeting today. I just really appreciate it. We're going to make sure to put all the ways to get a hold of you in our show notes. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we wrap things
Well,
up?
yeah, I want to share something to your listeners directly because
Sure.
proactive leaders right now really need to be paying attention to emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
The number one complaint is having an emotional bully as a boss. And the number one request, desire of our workforce today is to feel valued and appreciated. So I love what you just said, even about yourself. I know you have a background, you're from the Army.
Yeah.
Nobody teaches how to have emotional intelligence. And studies are showing by 2024, the global demand for emotional intelligence skills is expected to increase by 10 times, and it's in the top 10 demands from the World Economic Forum.
Wow.
So, one thing I want to open up as a gift to your listeners is I have a legendary leaders assessment. It assesses your emotional intelligence. Now, I usually use this as a pre assessment and a post assessment for the LEAP method, which is a annual program. LEAP is an acronym, Ken. It stands for Leadership, Engagement, Alignment, and Purpose.
Okay.
And what we do is we help people level up their entire leadership team to have the best, most proactive, highest emotional intelligence so that you're really creating culture by design from the top down. So I want to offer that assessment to your listeners
Cool.
complimentary
Cool.
so that
Cool.
they can take it. They get a lot of feedback. You'll get a score in each of those four areas. And I also want to offer to your listeners. So, listener, if you're hearing me and this is sparking interest in you, reach out. You can reach out to me directly at sarah@fruehlingcoaching.com or go to the website and do the connect thing. And I will set up a complimentary call with you if you tell me that you're one of Ken's listeners. Ken, you're
Nice.
making a huge difference in this space. And
Thank
of
you.
course, I love Tony Robbins and all that he's doing. And I know you're involved in that world. I mean, anything we can do to help the world be a better place where we're reaching and connecting.
For sure.
Amen, right? That's what we
But
need to do.
well, you're definitely doing your part. I appreciate it so much, and we're gonna put that offer and your website and all things Sarah will be in the show notes. And really great to meet you in person after all of our correspondence. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, have an awesome rest of your night, and we will talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope so, Ken. It's been a delight. Thank you for
Th-
having me.
Thank you.